Hey, it's me again. Guys, I would really like to say again, just thanks for being here. Thanks for making this a part of your week. And I also wanted to say for those of you, how many of you guys are in CMU right now? I always am tempted to call it CMU, okay? So for those of you who are in CMU, this is the point, probably right about now, correct me if I'm wrong, this is when the semester starts to just suck a little bit. So those of you who are in the thick of it, I pray that God would just bless you and that you guys would get free coffee somehow, some way to stay up and do all you need to do. And just keep your heads up, guys. It's going to get easier, I promise. And with that having been said, we're going to get kind of rolling tonight. I really want to make sure that that we can communicate all that needs to be communicated tonight. So I just want to really hit the ground running, okay? So we're doing this series because we are committed to seeing Jesus more clearly. And that intro video kind of sets it up a little by saying that sometimes we envision Jesus through the lens of our culture, through the lens of the way we grew up. And I would say this, and my cell group meets on Thursdays. You guys should totally come. It's at my house. You let me know if you want to come, and I'll tell you where my house is. And it's at 7 o'clock tomorrow. In my cell group, the last time we met, which was last Thursday, we talked, and I think one of the coolest things was I said, how many of you guys thought Jesus was white when you were growing up? And it was like everybody. So if that's the first thing tonight, Jesus wasn't white, okay? So just throwing that out there. Jesus is best understood through the lens of his culture and not ours. Does that make sense? We kind of landed on that for sort of a purpose for doing the series and the purpose for last week. Jesus is best understood through the lens of his culture and not ours. And so what we're doing is we're taking a look at some of the pivotal things that Jesus said, some of the pivotal things that Jesus did, and we're kind of try to line them up as closely as we can with the context of the culture. Because we know that with the Bible, you can't say something that nothing in the Bible can mean to you what it did not mean to its original audience. And because of that, we take some of the things Jesus said and we apply it through the lens of our culture, and we filter it through our upbringing and the way we view the world and our worldview, and we confuse or distort the things that Jesus said. And sometimes, in some cases, we can make Jesus out to be a person that he never was at all. And so that's why we're doing the service. And in my opinion, we've really Americanized Jesus and we've kind of glossed over parts of his character. And I want to know Jesus. And I think that that's sort of a process that can go on and on throughout the course of our lives. And in my opinion, again, this is just me talking, I would say to know Jesus is to love Jesus. And I think that oftentimes those who are far away from Jesus or want nothing to do with him probably have a pretty distorted view of him. And in my opinion, what's been true in my life anyway, I can only speak for myself, is that the more I know God, the more I know Jesus and the person and work of Jesus Christ, the more I love him. So that's why we're talking about this. And last week we opened up with the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, and we learned sort of what a life of blessing looks like. And we learned that when Jesus was spouting off these Beatitudes, we're going to reread it here in a second. When he's spouting them off, they actually are not in random order. He's not just saying things. He's doing this type of teaching that was very common in his day and in his culture, as he was doing something, a bit of a sandwich teaching. And he was actually, the things that he said, they were building upon one another, okay? So every statement that he makes, the one that he makes, it builds on the one before it, with the Beatitudes. And we started to look at that. We looked at the poor, blessed are the poor in spirit. And what we learned about poor, we think of that as monetarily poor, not having a lot of money or not having a lot of wealth, not having a lot of power in that regard. But what he's really saying is blessed are those who are contrite, meaning that they're remorseful, that they're aware of their sin. That they're remorseful and aware of sin, that they're in need of atonement. Blessed are those people who are aware that there is a separation between them and God. And that's the foundation that he lays. And then the second layer that he puts on top of that is blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And when he says that, he's saying, blessed are those who mourn over the fact that there is sin in us, that there is brokenness in our world. And I said this last week to say that if there's one thing that all of us in this room have in common, it's honestly that we are all broken in some places, right? I think if you were to look at the person to the left of you or to the right of you and say, is there an area in your life where you're broken? I think it'd be very easy for that person to respond and say, yes, there is. I've experienced pain. I've experienced hurt. I know that there's things in my life that are just not right. There's things I see in the world around me that are just not right. And there's really this brotherhood in brokenness. And then we left off last week by saying when Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And meek does not mean weak, right? We learned about that because Jesus, he kind of gets this bad rap from culture and saying that he was super tender all the time and that he was just super soft and sweet. And yes, there's a side of him that was very compassionate, very loving, of course, but he was not weak. And what we learned that meek means, in all actuality, is it means that you're able to lay aside your agenda and you're not always having to prove yourself, that you're able to just kind of back off and let things be and to push towards a greater good. And I used an illustration last week about Jackie Robinson, how he faced all this adversity being the first African-American baseball player in the United States. And he faced all this adversity, and he did not respond directly to his adversaries, but rather he took the high road and just played the game of baseball. And in doing that, he changed everything. He changed the entire landscape of the sport because he did not feel he had to prove himself in that moment as people were speaking out against him. And that is very similar to the character of Jesus, and it's something that is part of a blessed life. And so tonight, we're going to look at the rest of Jesus' teachings in the Beatitudes because they're super important, and we want to see how that stacks up, and we kind of want to see the progression of that. Before we do that, though, would you just pray with me one more time before we open God's Word? Lord, thank you again for all these people here. God, I do pray that you would speak to us through your Word, God, because honestly, I do not have the intelligence, I do not have the creativeness, I really don't have the skill to cause life change. And I would never even for a moment admit or think to myself that I did. But Lord, we do know that there is power when we open your word, and that when you speak to your people, that there is something that's transformative about that. And I ask that you would do that tonight in us, in myself included, Lord. And would you just speak to your people tonight? Amen. So again, I think we do sometimes a bad job of pulling verses one by one out, and you don't really get to understand the context. So I really want to just read this passage in its entirety so you can get the feel for Jesus' overall intent. You can get the feel for the flow of his words. You can get the feel for the passage as a whole. So it's Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 1. It says this, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. So this crowd of people gathered around him, and he sat down. His disciples came over in verse 2, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then he ends it off by saying, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you, falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, and so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And so you're getting this kind of picture of what Jesus said. These are things that are obviously important to Jesus. This is one of the first times that a crowd has ever really gathered around Jesus intentionally to hear what he had to say. And so this is what he starts by saying in Matthew chapter 5. And there's a lot of great truth in there. We got through verse 5 last week, and we're going to continue on the foundation. Remember, keep in mind that there is an intentional progression, there's an intentional building that's happening here. So we kind of learned that, after your eyes have been opened to sin, and after you've mourned that, and after you've laid down your own agenda, then you kind of reach this place. So the first one we're going to tear apart tonight is this, Matthew 5:6. Where he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Now, I'm going to tell you why this is so easily undervalued in our current culture and climate, because we have a tendency to think of hunger and thirst much differently than the culture that Jesus was speaking to. Because if I'm hungry, I was hungry this morning, I dropped my oldest son off for school, then I had to go drop my middle son off for preschool, and then it's just me and my 3-year-old Matthias, and we're hungry. And so there's, I said, Matthias, are you hungry? And he said, yes, because each one of them only answers yes to that question, no matter what. And so I said, do you want to go get something to eat? Yeah, sure. And we don't have like a ton of extra money right now. And really, there's not much that's stopping me from getting something to eat, So we go and we have a breakfast burrito. So good. Whenever you're hungry, it's just pretty easy to find something to eat, right? And whenever you're thirsty, it's even easier to find a water fountain. I mean, even if you have to go, to the archaic faucet and turn it on cold and just drink out of that, it's super easy. But what you don't understand, or what we gloss over at first glance, is that we don't get the context in which he's saying this in the culture that he's speaking to. Because this is a Middle Eastern desert climate, okay? You think about a Middle Eastern desert climate in a culture that their world was much more undeveloped than ours is, and there was often just a great distance between them and the nearest well. They've understood what it's like to be super hungry and super thirsty. We have some hunger issues here in the States, right? But I would say thirst, it's like a non-factor. In the United States, you can go anywhere to a bunch of public places, and there's no way you're going to die of dehydration unless you choose that. And so we don't get the severity of what he's saying when he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And so he's saying that there's this deep longing. If you can think of the hungriest you've ever been, I've done a few fasts, and I've done somewhere like I go from, just kind of more of a paleo type thing, and then it goes to just fruits and veggies, and that's when the hunger really hits. Because you can only eat so much celery, and you can't, I've never just gorged out on cucumbers, you can only eat so much and it's not good anymore. And so then I've gone to just juice, and then for a couple days of nothing. And that extreme hunger, I don't think that in my life, maybe it's at certain times, that I've really experienced a hunger and a deep desire for the righteousness of God that way. And he's saying, in order for your life to be blessed, this is a step along in the process, in the progression, that you would begin to be super desperate, super hungry for the righteousness of God. And then when he says righteousness, he's talking about God's righteousness and our righteousness. God's righteousness is in this, that he is mighty to save. So when we're talking about hungering for the saving power of God, the transformative power of God, that's his righteousness. And then not only that, but we hunger for a righteous life of our own. That means that we are living to please God, not living to earn something from God, but because he's given us something freely, that our response would be desperately to please him with our lives. And that it would be desperate for us to have compassion or respond in justice and compassion to the people around us. And it doesn't say, if you'll notice, it does not say, blessed are those who are righteous. It doesn't say, blessed are those who have it all figured out. Blessed are those who they sin 10 times or less per day. He's saying, blessed are those who hunger for it, who have a desire for it, a deep a longing for the righteousness of God and to respond and live in a righteous way. So at this point in the progression, we see that it is desire that kind of takes us to the next level, a deep longing, a deep desire, a deep sense of wanting to please God because we are aware of our sin, right? Because we are aware of the chasm, of the Grand Canyon that sits between my very best and God's standard for my life. And we realize that, and we have a desire for God to intervene. So then the next one is this, Matthew chapter 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And I think out of all of them, this one makes the most sense, just hearing it at face value. Blessed are those who are merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And when we're talking about mercy, I would say there's a couple of different ways you can look at that as well. Mercy is sort of similar to that compassion thing, right? Because you remember there was a blind guy on the roadside as Jesus was walking by, and he says, Son of David, he cries out to Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And he's saying, look at me and look at my situation and have compassion for me. Have you ever played the game Mercy before when you were a kid? And you interlock and then Mercy's like, okay, have compassion, let up. You win, right? That is what mercy is. But then also, to be at someone else's mercy is, again, it's to ask for compassion from them. But there's another facet to mercy, and it's actually forgiveness. To show mercy on someone might mean to forgive someone. So therefore, if we show mercy, then we are showing compassion and we're showing forgiveness for those who hurt us. And I think if you're thinking of this as a process, I think a lot of us get hung up on this area in the process. We're like, we get that we should desire God. We get that we're sinners. But what stops us from moving on in our progression with Christ oftentimes is we just can't forgive. We can't show mercy to others who have sinned against us. When you look at the Lord's Prayer, he says, forgive those who trespass against you, because God, we're asking you to forgive us of the way we've trespassed against you, God. And so you're thinking about that, and this is a promise that he's saying, if you can learn to forgive, there's two things that are going to happen. One is you're going to be lifted, the weight of guilt is going to be lifted off of you. The weight of unforgiveness, the weight of just letting that root of bitterness come when someone hurts you is going to be lifted off of you. So not only are you going to receive mercy in that the weight of what comes from harboring unforgiveness will be lifted, but also stating that we will be forgiven by our Heavenly Father. That's an area where a lot of people struggle. That's an area where I have struggled so much. Even into my time like working here, I know that I grew up in church, and I think in certain regards, church hurt me a lot. Just things that happen inside the church with people of the church. And I had a hard time letting go of that. And somebody told me once, how you know if you've forgiven someone or not is if you can think of that situation, you can think of that person, and you don't get mad, and you don't feel the hurt anymore. And I realized that, man, that is a tough thing. But he's saying, if you can learn how to do that, then not only will you be lifted of that weight will be lifted off you, but you'll also be forgiven by me. And so that's something that's super important in the process, and in our desire. That's what gets us to the next level, is learning how to forgive. And then Matthew chapter 5, verse 8 says, this is a really cool one. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So he's saying, he's talking about this inner purity, because you're right, your heart is inside. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In Psalms 24, David, he says this. He says, he's writing this sort of poetic message to God and about God and for God. And he says, who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Those with clean hands and a pure heart. And that is something that is really common in the Jewish faith, that when you're seeing pure hands and you're seeing a clean heart, those two things compounded together, that they're really important, because it's talking about clean hands is like you're clean on the outside. And they in the rabbinical law, they had this whole gigantic book of just what it looks like to be clean. So outward cleanliness was very important. And then if you take that into the day, when you start to uncover the stories of Jesus, how many of you guys have ever heard story, and we've told them here a lot, of Jesus interacting with the Pharisees? And Jesus has a lot to say to the Pharisees, because he says, he uses this example one time. He says, the outside of your cup is clean, it's polished, and it looks great. But the inside of the cup is filthy. And at the end of the day, I mean, have you ever left milk out and you see that curdled nastiness? You ever done that? One day, you guys are going to have kids, and your kids are going to leave their little milk cup in the car, and you're going to clean out the car, and you're going to open that, and you're going to vomit. So I'm just forewarned, those of you who have kids, back me up. Is that true? Is that going to happen? You will at least dry heave, okay? If not worse. Because and who cares if the outside of that cup is shiny? Do you want to drink something if the inside is nasty? No, absolutely not. And Jesus actually, it was very strategic when he says this, because he says, blessed are the pure in heart. He doesn't even refer to that outward cleanliness, because the Jewish people got that. They knew you were supposed to look a certain way. They knew you were supposed to act a certain way. But where they were always falling short was in that inner purity. Because the Pharisees were viewed, they were elevated as the spiritually elite, the best of the best. And even Jesus said to them, the inside in your heart, it's corrupt, man. It's not pure. And so he's talking about this inner purity, that they will see God, that the result of that is cool, that you will see God. Because purity of heart can be viewed as pure intentions, good integrity, and it can also be viewed as transparency, that you're not hiding anything, that you're letting people seeing in to the purity of your heart. And the word heart, we use it here in America, it means your feelings, right? I love you with all my heart. That means I just feel this strong love for you. Or my heart breaks when I see this. It means I feel horrible when I see this, right? But in the Jewish culture, there are so many different words that get translated to heart. It can mean soul. It could mean your motives. It can mean your feelings. It can mean your passions. And he's saying, if all of these things are pure, then you will see God. And he's not actually saying that you will see God in this lifetime, because we've seen all throughout the scripture when Moses, he got to see God pass by and look at the back of him. Not to actually see God, but that you would have a knowledge, have a vision, have a clear understanding and picture of who God is. And honestly, I have to say, if there's something that is just lacking in our world today, and that's exactly why we're doing this series, because we don't, as a society, as a culture, I would say the younger folks in America, we do not have a clear picture of who Jesus is. Because it's just gotten a little more distorted generation to generation. And some people are saying that Jesus is this cash cow, that if you name it and claim it, that and we're missing the boat. And some people think Jesus is this guy who wants to suck your life of any fun or enjoyment, and it's all about do this and don't do that, right? I don't know about you, but when I grew up, I thought that of Jesus, that I needed to behave my way into a relationship with him. We do not have a clear understanding of who Jesus is, but he's saying it right here, that we'll know God, we'll see God, we'll have a vision or a picture or an understanding of who God is if we can keep our heart pure. And if you see that as, once you let go of that bitterness, once you're able to show mercy on another sinner because they've sinned against you, like God is starting to purify your heart a little bit, and you're able to see a little bit more clearly who he is. You get a better understanding of the way God feels when we sin against him, when you're able to see other people sin against you and forgive them. Because I know there's been times with certain people in my life that I wanted to respond in anger to them when they've hurt me. I wanted to respond a certain way. And when I got to the point of it, all I could do is respond in love. And I think that is showing that there is a God and that he is working through us when you start to see things like that happen. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 then says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Now, this one is super interesting, and if you're thinking of the progression again, you're able to have purity of heart, you're able to have a clear understanding, and then this is an action thing, right? To be a peacemaker is a verb. It is something that you do. You make peace, right? Did I just blow your mind with that theology right now? If you're a peacemaker, then you make peace. But you know what's crazy is this word, I was doing some research and some study, peacemaker, the word that got translated to peacemaker, this is the only time it's ever mentioned in the entire Bible. And it's different than a peacekeeper or a pacifist type of thing where you just don't want there to be any fighting, you're against war, so you're a peacekeeper, you're about, but he's saying actually it's more of an action, it's more of a verb, a peacemaker, that you would actually go into situations and make peace where there was no peace before. That you would go into your relationships and make peace where there was no peace before. That you would go into your campus, you would go into your college class, go into your dorm room, go into your workplace, and that you would make peace where there naturally has been tension, where there naturally has been opposition, and people, you would make peace. And he uses this, and this is the only time it's used. He's not saying, I don't like to fight. No, it's not saying that. But it's saying that there would be something about you at this point in the progression that you could come and you could actually live a certain way that people would understand that you are a son of God. That if you would possess this blessing, then it would be easy for people to see who you really are. It would be easy for people to see that there is something different about that guy. There is something different about that girl. Because when she comes into a room, she makes peace. And that's not even to say necessarily just fighting, but you make this comfort and this ease, and you make this serenity. Like it seems like where things are messed up, you can kind of bring them together. If we could possess this blessing, if we could start to move in that and operate in that, again, it's compounding on all these other things, then people would start to see that there is a tangible difference between us and the world around us. And I think for me, that those types of statements, they sound hard to believe, because I've definitely sat through a lot of sermons that are like, if you do A, B, and C, then 1, 2, and 3 is guaranteed that it will happen to you. And don't get that confused with what I'm saying right now. But he's saying there is a way to live. There is a way to walk with God. There is a journey that God wants to take you on where these things can be byproducts of you continuing to push, continuing to progress, continuing to build in your life with God. And finally, verse 10 says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And this one gets really distorted really quickly, and I'll tell you what I mean. There are people around the world, this is something that people are clearly experiencing in other parts of the world that is quite foreign to us, okay? We tend to consider any like calamity, any disjointedness, oh, I'm just being persecuted. Got fired. Like I actually, one of my buddies was telling me that, you know, he had to fire somebody at his job because he's in management. And the lady was a Christian, and she's like, I'm just being persecuted for my faith. He's like, no, you suck at your job, and that's why you got fired. Like there are two different things. That's not being persecuted. Because we tend to think of that as Americans, like anytime anybody opposes us in any way, we're being persecuted, even if it's self-imposed. But what Jesus is saying is that there will come a point in your journey with Christ where we will be very closely related to him. That people will associate you immediately with the God that you serve. Because your life starts to look like his, you start to talk like him, you start to react like him, you talk about him. It's pretty clear when somebody's about something. It's pretty clear over time what they're about. You don't really have to ask them, it just comes out. So what Jesus is saying is that there will be a time where you're very closely related with Jesus if you allow all these blessings to come into your life. And the thing about Jesus is he is the single most polarizing public figure to date. I don't think there's a very a large number of people who are indifferent towards Jesus. I think there's a group of people right now, if you were to go hang around with some people under the age of 35 probably, there's a lot of people who are indifferent to God, saying like, yeah, there might be a God, there might not be. I really believe there is a God, but I don't really know, where that is. But there's not very many people in the planet and in the history of the world that have ever been really indifferent towards Jesus. Because Jesus makes it really hard to be indifferent towards him. Some of the things he says and some of the things he does. You either love Jesus, you're really all in with Jesus, or you can't stand when people talk about Jesus. And unfortunately, he's saying this will happen when people associate you with me, people will persecute you. But I think in all reality, he's saying theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That you really belong to, you are really building, your life is really centered around the advancement of the kingdom of heaven. When you're closely related with me and when people hate you because of it. He says that in John, people will hate you because of me, and it's okay. And so I would say it's a great joy to be persecuted for being like Jesus, for being close to Jesus, for being related to Jesus. And there's a picture that I would show you that would illustrate this. I think we've all seen that. And I look at these guys, there are 22 people that got their heads cut off, and there was video footage of it, and it floated around the internet for a while, because they refused to deny the Jesus that we're talking about in this sermon tonight. And now, when you look at them, and when I look at myself, I can't help but think that there is a difference in the way that they believe and to the extent that they believe compared to myself. I don't know if I'm there yet. Because in America, we really don't have that type of persecution coming our way at this time. But if there's anything that I would say that Jesus felt it was important to share these with his first real captive audience that was there to hear him, and it holds just as much weight to the people that he said it to as it does to us today. And if I were to sum all this up in like one easy to remember thing, it would be like this. Following Jesus is a progressive and lifelong path. That's so simple, but it's so profound. Following Jesus is a progressive, means a constantly moving forward, and a lifelong path. It's not a path that you ever arrive at while you have a breath in your lungs. And to really follow Jesus is to be progressing, to be moving forward. And there are times where you're going to make big jumps, and there are times where you're going to be barely scraping by. But we have been lied to inadvertently, on accident, that you guys sitting here tonight is all that it takes to be about what Jesus is about. That couldn't be further from the truth. Following Jesus is a progressive, a forward-moving, and lifelong process. You will not arrive. But then we have to ask ourselves, where are we? You know, if you look at these Beatitudes as a whole, where are we? Where are we getting hung up? I really think for a lot of us, we get hung up on we're not able to show mercy to people. Maybe some of us are getting hung up on the fact that we don't really have that desire. I feel like there's been a lot of times in my life where I've lacked the desire, the hunger and thirsting for righteousness. Maybe when I walk into situations, I'm not a peacemaker. Maybe I make things worse. And that's kind of my thing. And maybe we need to relook that, and revisit that. Maybe we focus on the outer purity and not on the inner purity. What is it for you? What is it that's getting you hung up? What is it that's stopping you from progressing in your relationship with Christ? Because it is not something that you arrive at when you raised your hand when you were a little kid and you repeated a prayer after a pastor. That wasn't the arrival, that was the start of the journey. And it's hard at times, and it's lifelong. But at the end of it says, ours is the kingdom of heaven. That you're able to stand for something, you're able over time to get to know the God of the universe, and you're able to come to a place where you're so closely related to him that people will hate you because of your devotion to him. I honestly don't know that I'm there. I don't see people hating me because of my devotion to Christ. I think people are more indifferent towards me. But they were hardly anyone's indifferent towards Jesus. And that's something we have to look at. That's something we have to evaluate. And if you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like you'll never arrive at a place where you're able to move and progress, I would say this to you, that Jesus is drawing you. Jesus is drawing you not to perfection, but he's drawing you to the next step. Would you pray with me? Lord, I pray that you'd be speaking to every heart and every life in this room. God, show us where we're being hung up. Show us, God, what's stopping us, what's roadblocking us from progressing in our relationship with you. God, is it our lack of being able to forgive? Reveal to us, Lord, what's stopping us from making movement with you, from being more like you today than we were yesterday. And God, I pray that you would not only show us what's blocking us, God, but you would encourage us to continue to progress. God, I pray especially over those who are my age and younger, Lord, for a hunger and thirst for righteousness. God, would you teach us what it is to be desperate for your saving grace, to be desperate for your transformative love and power, and to be desperate to please you and honor you with our lives, God. Help us, Lord. Speak to us now. Amen. So practically, what do we take away? The first thing is this, that you would ask yourself tonight, where am I on the path right now? Do I hunger? Can I forgive? Am I closely related to Jesus or not? Where am I on my journey with God? Am I stuck? Am I sliding backwards? Am I moving forward? What's stopping me? Be introspective about that. And the second is this, you would find a way to take the next step. Maybe the next step for you is talking with a friend and building a relationship that the two of you can honor God together and that you can encourage each other, spur each other on. Maybe the next step for you is to join some type of cell group, small group, campus ministry, be around some people that can give you encouragement, be around some people that would help you look more like Jesus. Maybe it's you need to reach out to somebody and ask them if they'll mentor you or disciple you. Maybe you need to be motivated and coached. Maybe you need to really lay it out there and share your life with somebody. Whatever it is, maybe you need to seek forgiveness or healing. But would you figure out a way to take the next step? As you stand, we're going to prepare to worship. Tim's going to lead us through communion tonight. But I pray that you would just remember that this walk with Jesus is progressive and it's lifelong. Let's worship together, guys.